The road that cut like a silver thread through the loin-deep grasses of Savannah seemed, at a casual glance, merely a human scar on the land, an intrusion of asphalt and white paint where the world otherwise moved with the slow, ancient rhythms of wind and prey. On one particular dawn, when the sky was a pressed blue and the air tasted of dust and first light, that road became the stage for an impossible meeting. A pride of lions, heavy with sun and muscle, moving in the geometry of hunger, and a python, a long, living rope of green-brown scales, coiled in slow, patient bewilderment across a yellow strip of human effort. The lions had been on patrol, strolling from one patch of shade to another, noses low to the earth to read the invisible ledger of sense. Sephew, the lead male, carried his mane like a banner of years and battles. His kingdom was not merely a collection of kilometers, but a social architecture of glances, growls, and the gentle, absolute violence of feeding. He walked with the slow authority of one who had survived drought and rivalries. The lionesses glided just behind him, muscular and silent, each glance sharpening the map of their world. Cubs tumbled in the rear with the surplus energy of the unconcerned, but the adults moved with a purposeful economy. As they rounded a bend where the road lay like a ribbon between two grassy serows, the pride froze. There, stretched across the asphalt like a noble log of some other planet, lay the python, its coils layered in patient spirals, had lifted a fraction, tongue flicking the world as though tasting the very air itself. It was not the usual sight. Snakes lived in a fold of grass or under sun-warmed termite mounds, not draped across human thoroughfares. The snake's skin shimmered with patterns, olive and earth, dark arrowheads racing down its sides, which made it, from a distance, seem like a fallen section of the veldt itself. The air in the space between scales and paws was taut as a drum. Sephew's nostrils flared. The python tasted lion on the breeze, and, somewhere deeper, the metallic salt of iron, blood, perhaps, or the faint trace of a carcass from which the lions had fed. Neither animal expected the other. Both had been summoned by the scent lines of their own survival. The first moments were a study in ancient etiquette. The lions curved into a semicircle, tails low, eyes apprenticed to movement and muscle. The python, unfurling its head carefully, watched with a reptilian patience older than the lion's roar. There was no sound at first beyond the small rustle of grass and the occasional high metallic chirp of an unseen insect. Then a cub, young and heedless, skittered too close, fascinated by a pattern coil that looked like a rope a playmate could pounce on. Sephew's ears snapped to attention. Two of the lionesses tensed. The python's head lifted higher, tongue flashing faster. The situation compressed into a single law of the wild. Proximity equals risk. In the next heartbeat, the world dissolved into motion. The cub pounced with naivete of youth and a soft explosion of fur. The python uncoiled with a speed that belied its bulk, a living whip whose first strike was to secure the brave's small throat in a grip of impossibly tight muscle. The cub yelped, a note that seemed to fracture summer, and the lionesses lunged. Motion flared, golden bodies, sudden and precise, were a swarm of intent. The python, feeling pressure on the coil around its prey, tightened with the slow, centripetal inevitability of constrictors. It was not mindless cruelty but biological law. Squeeze until breathing stops, then unhinge the jaws of the prey must be swallowed whole. Sephew slammed into the snake's middle with the blunt force of a boulder, claws scraping asphalt, maw foaming with the instinct to kill. For a terrifying moment, the two forces were locked. The python's serpentine muscles welded to the cub's small form, the lion's jaws and paws hammered. Try to pry away what the coil refused to relinquish. Time folded into the immediacy of survival, a handful of breaths that felt like centuries. The savannah itself seemed to hold its breath. Then something subtle and unexpected happened. The python, whose physics were all about embrace and suffocation, reacted not as a single-minded executioner, but like an animal that knows danger beyond its own mechanism. It adjusted the grip, spiral by spiral, recalculating the burden of threats. A massive male lion, the penetrating smell of blood from teeth and flesh, the sharp movements of paws. The lionesses, seeing the futility of ripping flesh from living muscle without suffering the bind of that muscle, altered their approach. They shifted to become collaborators rather than attackers. One distracted the python's head with jabs and feints. Another hammered the coils with heavy paws. teeth scraping scales so that the reptile's focus began to splinter. Cephew, large and measured, used his weight to wedge the snake's midsection, preventing its forward wriggle that might swallow the cub into the dark canyons of its belly. The cub, bleeding but alive, made a sound like a bell struck badly. The distress turned the scene electric. A small cloud of flies identified the fresh scent and began to orbit like tiny satellites, but the greater predators maintained their grim choreography. The python, meanwhile, performed the strangest adaptation, part calculation, part animal cunning. Instead of merely clinging, it began to coil into defensive loops around its own middle, creating a central mass of reinforced muscle that bristled like a shield. It thrust its head high, mouth pinged open to display the patterned roof of its jaws and the small, curved teeth that are made for gripping, not chewing. Its tongue snapped the air, tasting complex bouquet, lion cub, fear, human scent from the road, the faint oil tang of the asphalt itself. To the python, the cub was both a meal and a risk that had suddenly become entangled with larger, more dangerous appetites. The lions, for their part, read this and adapted. They did not throw their strength into one assault but circled, isolating the python's ends, seeking leverage. The mother of the cub, hidden a hairline away, eyes aflame with desperate, focused fury, performed a movement that could come from any story of maternal bravery. She lunged to the snake's head, teeth clamping the scaly throat, while another lioness tore at the coils near the rear. It is a brutal ballet. The python, in response, arched and struck, its body a flurry of pistons, missing by heart-stopping millimeters. A spray of sand and small rocks flew as paws beat the earth and tails lashed. This was not a mere contest of strength. It was a negotiation of species with different weapons and different thresholds for damage. Flesh and scale ripped, fur and skin split, and a shredding chorus of cries made the road an altar of violence. Yet, beneath the chaos, a strange order revealed itself. Each creature operated within the limits of its design, and each recognized, in the other, a mirror of survival. The python moved with the patient inevitability of reptilian calculus. The lions, with the improvisational muscle memory of carnivores, evolved to take down speed and weight. Around them the savanna resumed its rhythms. The distant bleat of a wary antelope, the slow, circular glint of vultures wheeling in the far thermals. Yet at this axis, life and death converse in the oldest language there is. You. When the first chaos settled into breathing and bruises, a deep silence poured itself over Savannah. The air shimmered above the asphalt, heat rippling like an invisible tide between lion and serpent. Cephew stood still now, his chest rising in slow, deliberate heaves, the mane around his head matted with the moisture of his own effort. Beneath his paws, the dust bore the record of violence. Loops of scaly indentations, streaks of fur, a few bright beads of blood drying too quickly under the unforgiving sun. The python, only a few feet away, lay half-coiled, its great body arranged like the letters of an ancient script upon the ground. One side of its scales was darker, smeared with a faint sheen of lion saliva. Its ribs pulsed visibly where muscles worked to recover air. Yet its head was still high, tongue flicking, eyes like glass coins, black and ancient, without any glimmer of emotion. The cub, save but trembling, crouched beneath the shadow of one of the lionesses. Its neck bore the mark of the snake's constriction, a dark, uneven ring of compressed fur and bruised flesh. It whimpered once, quietly, and then stilled as its mother pressed her muzzle against it, as though to transfer courage through the simple act of breath. The rest of the pride watched in tense formation, their tails twitching, paws shifting on the hot road. The situation had become an impasse, neither side willing to strike, neither yet willing to retreat. For the python, this was no longer about hunger. Its instincts whispered of survival, of the risk in facing not one adversary but many, each capable of tearing it apart if they acted together. Its mind, primitive yet precise, began to search for a path, back to the safety of grass, shade, and silence. For the lions, something older and more symbolic had begun to take root. Pride. They were creatures of dominance, of control. The road was not just a road. It was a boundary of their land, their rhythm, their right to rule, to leave an intruder alive, one that had dared to coil around one of their young, was to permit insult to the structure of their order. Cephew lowered his head, the muscles along his shoulders tightening, the low rumble of a growl building in his chest, like thunder about to break. It was not directed at the python alone, but at the very confusion of this encounter. A beast that was not prey in the familiar sense, not rival in the usual order. It moved without legs, killed without claws, and did not fear his roar. This unshakable calm in the snake's black eyes unsettled even the king. He circled slowly, his paw steps measured, watching how the python's head followed his every move. The lionesses fanned out again, instinctively reforming their hunting arc, the cub's mother staying behind with her wounded child. The wind shifted, and with it came the smell of hot rubber from some distant vehicle, the faint metallic trace of human interference. But no engine appeared. They were alone, royalty and reptile, on a stage of sun and silence. Then the python moved. Not a lunge, not a strike, just a careful slide of a few inches, the whisper of its scales against asphalt. The lions tense as one, tails flicking upright, shoulders coiling for launch. But the movement didn't stop. Slowly, elegantly, the python began to gather itself into motion, its body folding and stretching, the glimmer of sunlight running like liquid down its sides. It seemed to be conceding the ground, retreating toward the edge of the road where the grass began again. Yet its head never dipped. Its eyes remained fixed on Sephew, unblinking, as if warning that retreat was not surrender but choice. Sephew took a step forward, and the pride followed like a ripple after a stone's drop. The sound of their movement, the scrape of claws, the whisper of fur, cut through the silence. The python paused. Its head lifted slightly higher. It opened its mouth, revealing the black hollow of its throat and the glint of fangs designed not for venom, but for grip. The sound it made was not a hiss, but something deeper, a slow exhale that seemed to come from the belly of the earth itself. The lion stopped. The sound had weight, like a language from a time before theirs. In that moment, two empires stared at each other. The feline, born of sun and speed, and the serpentine, born of earth and patience. Both were bound by the same commandment: survive at any cost. But the methods were alien to each other. The lion relied on power expressed outward, on dominance and presence. The python relied on endurance, on silence, on the unrelenting pressure of inevitability. Minutes passed. The cub whimpered again, and that small sound shattered the balance. Sephew's restraint snapped. He lunged, massive, golden, magnificent in the violence of his form, and the python responded in the same instant, its head darting like a whip. They collided in a blur of fur and scale, sound exploding into the still air, the deep, tearing roar of a lion meeting the bone-crushing strength of a serpent. The python coiled upward, wrapping its length around Sephew's foreleg, its head driving for his neck, but Sephew's roar broke across the plain, summoning his pride. Lionesses charged from every side. What followed was a storm of movement too complex to describe as battle alone. It was instinct meeting instinct, two blueprints of nature in contradiction. The python's strength lay in singular motion, constriction, and precision. The lion's strength lay in multiplicity, in numbers, in coordination, in fury. Each lion is struck from a different angle. One clamped the snake's tail, another raked claws down its flank. The python retaliated by looping itself tighter, the massive muscles sliding beneath fur, trying to crush breath from whatever it caught. Sephew snarled through pain, his jaws seeking the soft place behind the serpent's head. Dust exploded upward, feathers of grit suspended in the glowing air. The struggle moved across the road like a living storm, coils and paws and claws scraping at the surface until the very ground seemed to tremble. The snake's tail thrashed, striking a lioness across the muzzle, drawing blood. She recoiled, her eyes burning with new rage. Another seized a chance to clamp down on the snake's midsection, tearing scales free in ragged strips. Still, the python fought, every inch of its body a weapon, every second a test of endurance. And then, suddenly, the battle changed. The python, sensing that it could not win through sheer strength, shifted tactics. It began to move backward, uncoiling not in retreat, but in redirection, pulling toward the roadside ditch where tall grass offered concealment. Sephew saw it, roared again, and gave chase. The pride surged forward. The snake's head vanished into the reeds, but half its length still thrashed in view. One lioness leapt, landing on the visible coils, pinning them, another bit down on the moving tail. The python struck back one last time, coiling the lioness's hind leg, and for a few seconds it seemed the fight might begin anew. Then Sephi came down with all his weight, his jaws finding the place just behind the serpent's skull. He bit and held, ignoring the twisting force beneath him, ignoring the searing pain in his leg where scales had scraped raw. His teeth sank deeper until the pressure under his jaw lessened, then stopped. The python's movement slowed. The coils unwound, and the long, ancient body fell still. Silence again. The lion stood among the wreckage, panting, bloodied, victorious. The python lay stretched across the road like a fallen river, its body reflecting sunlight in broken scales. Sephi released it, stepped back, and lifted his head toward the horizon. The pride gathered around him, the cub pressing close to its mother. The king's eyes met the line of the grass where the serpent had come from, as if acknowledging an equal that the world had forced him to destroy. The sun, unbothered by their struggle, climbed higher, bleaching the road in white light. The lion's turn began to move again, slowly, regally, leaving behind only prints and dust and the long shadow of the python, a reminder that even kings must sometimes fight gods older than their crown. When the dust settled over the savannah, a strange hush descended, a quiet so deep it felt alive, as though the land itself had paused to absorb what had transpired. The road, moments ago a storm of movement and fury, now stretched back into stillness, its surface scarred with the imprints of claws, coils, and chaos. Overhead, vultures traced circles in the radiant blue, their shadows gliding across the lifeless body of the python. The lion stood amid the wreckage, muscles twitching beneath their tawny hides, the rhythm of their breathing the only sound breaking the air. Sephi, the great male, remained near the fallen serpent. His chest heaved, sides slick with sweat and dust, eyes narrowed as he examined the massive form that lay before him, a creature of muscle and silence, once alive with power, now surrendered to gravity. He moved closer, each step deliberate, and placed a paw upon the snake's flank. There was no response, no twitch, no ripple beneath the scales. Death had claimed its due. Sephi's mane, dark and heavy, moved faintly in the breeze, his posture less that of a conqueror and more that of a witness. Around him, the lionesses waited, their eyes darting between the python and their leader. The cubs, shielded behind their mothers, peered out with wide, questioning eyes, as though trying to understand the meaning of such stillness after such violence. The cub that had nearly perished sat weakly at its mother's side, breathing shallowly. Its neck bore the raw imprint of the python's embrace, a reminder that survival in this kingdom was never gentle. The mother, her fur streaked with blood and dust, nuzzled her child gently, her breath coming in low hums of reassurance. There was something maternal yet feral in that sound, a promise spoken without words. You live because we fought. The rest of the pride lingered in a semicircle, a formation that mirrored the unity of the earlier battle, but now carried a quieter energy, a shared reverence for what they had faced. Sephi's gaze drifted beyond the road, toward the endless plains where heat shimmered like glass. The scent of iron, the smell of blood, hung thick, attracting the first scouts of the sky. Vultures descended in slow, lazy spirals, their dark wings carving shadows across the scene. A few landed nearby, their cautious sidesteps betraying both hunger and fear. Sephi's ears flicked once, but he did not chase them away. The battle had drained him. The weight of leadership pressed down not just on his body, but on something deeper, a wordless comprehension of balance. He knew that this was how it always ended, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, feeding one another in the eternal exchange of life. He turned to his pride. The lionesses stood still, their sides rising with a slow, exhausted rhythm of recovery. One of them limped. Another's muzzle was streaked red from the fight, but their eyes held a fierce gleam, the pride's unity reaffirmed through shared struggle. Without a sound, Sephi began to move, a slow and regal procession down the road, his steps tracing a path that shimmered in the light. One by one, the lionesses followed, the cubs trotting close to their mother's legs. The youngest, the one who had faced death, stumbled once but kept moving, encouraged by the soft nudge of its mother's head. As they moved away, the scene behind them began to change. The vultures grew bolder, descending upon the python's body. their beaks tearing at the scaled flesh with grotesque efficiency. A few marabou storks joined, their long shadows like spears across the cracked asphalt. Within minutes, the remains that had been the serpent's power became a feast for the scavengers of the sky, a reminder that in this land, nothing stayed still for long. Death was not an ending but a transfer. The lions walked in silence, their bodies outlined by the sun, casting long golden shadows across the savannah. The wind carried whispers of grass and dust, the faint pulse of crickets hidden in the reeds. Somewhere in the distant trumpet of an elephant echoed, a sound vast enough to remind them that even their dominance had boundaries. Nature was a circle, not a throne. Sephi led the pride toward the shade of an acacia grove, where the earth dipped into a shallow hollow. Here, beneath the soft murmur of wind through branches, the lions collapsed one by one, their bodies sinking into rest. The lionesses groomed their cubs, licking wounds and smoothing fur, the simple rhythm of tongues and breath restoring calm. The cub who had been attacked whimpered once as its mother cleaned the bruised skin around its neck. But soon it settled, eyes fluttering shut in exhaustion. Sephi lay apart, half in shadow, half in light. His amber eyes remained open, reflecting the slow dance of leaves overhead. His mind, if lions could be said to think in such terms, wandered the edges of instinct and memory. He had faced many battles, rivals, hyenas, drought, but something about this fight with the python lingered differently. It had not been a clash for food or dominance alone. It had been something older, deeper. It was as though the earth itself had tested him, sending forth a creature from a time before roars ever echoed across the plains, a test of patience versus strength, silence versus fury. As the heat began to fade and the day bled into the softer colors of afternoon, the savannah stirred once more. Herds of gazelles moved like flowing sand in the distance, their flanks shimmering. A family of warthogs scuttled from a thicket, cautious but curious. Life resumed its rhythm, as though the violence of the morning had been just another note in eternal song. Sephi rose, stretched, and looked once more toward the horizon. The sky had begun to tilt into gold, streaked with a faint blush of sunset. Somewhere beyond the hills, another predator hunted. Another prey fled. Another life began or ended. The lions would eat again, sleep again, fight again, but this moment, this encounter, would linger in their instincts. When the cubs grew and told their lessons in growls and play, they would know the scent of the serpent, the taste of fear and victory, and the shape of courage that had saved them. The savannah forgets nothing. Every roar, every fall, every death becomes part of its language, a story written not in words, but in tracks, in scents, in blood that dries into dust. And as night approached, bringing the soft chorus of crickets and the faint, distant rumble of thunder, Sephi closed his eyes at last. He could still feel the weight of the python's strength against his own, the press its coils, the slow, suffocating intent. Yet in that pressure, he had also felt the pulse of the world, the same pulse that beat within him, within every creature that lived and fought and died here. It was not hatred that bound them, but existence itself. The lion and the python had simply met at the crossing of their destinies. One had fallen, the other continued on, but in the grand symmetry of nature, both have fulfilled their purpose. Above the grove, the first stars appeared, cold and indifferent. The wind moved through the grass with the soft, endless voice of time. And somewhere on a road no longer marked by battle but by memory, the bones of a serpent gleamed faintly under the rising moon. The battle's echo faded, leaving only the sound of wind over savannah. The python's massive body lay still, its coils slackened in death. Around it, the pride gathered, panting, dust rising around their paws. Sephi, the lion king, stood motionless, his golden eyes reflecting both victory and fatigue. Nearby, the mother lioness nuzzled her cub, the marks of the serpent still visible around its neck. Above them, vultures began to descend, circling the scene like drifting shadows. No one roared. The silence spoke louder than any sound, a silence that belonged not to peace, but to the balance of nature. Slowly, Sephi turned, his mane catching the sun. The pride followed him back toward the acacia grove, leaving behind the fallen python for the scavengers. Each paw print they left in the dust became part of Savannah's story, a tale of strength, survival, and a quiet respect between predator and prey. As the sun sank behind the acacia trees, the savanna exhaled, its colors melting from gold to ember. Shadows stretched long and thin, weaving through the tall grass where crickets began their chorus. The air cooled, heavy with the scent of earth and blood, and the vultures, now silent silhouettes, settled upon the python's remains, their heads dipping and rising the rhythm of ancient hunger. Beyond them, the lions rested beneath the grove, their bodies sprawled like carved stone, motionless except for the slow lift of breath. Sephi lay slightly apart, the last rays of light brushing his mane with bronze. His eyes, half closed, reflected the horizon's dying glow. Around him, the pride drifted between sleep and awareness. Lionesses grooming cubs, one keeping watch with ears twitching toward distant rustles. The cub that had nearly perished now slept, curled against its mother's belly, its tiny chest rising and falling in fragile peace. The world seemed still again. Yet, beneath that calm, something moved. From beyond the grasslands, at the edge where shadow thickened into mystery, another presence stirred. A pair of eyes, low, amber, and deliberate, blinked open. Then another, then more. Hyenas, silent for once. They watched from a distance, their outlines flickering in and out of the dark. They were not here to fight. Not yet. Scavengers, drawn by the scent of the serpent's corpse. They waited until the lion's fatigue deepened into slumber. The night belonged to patience, and they were masters of waiting. A soft wind carried whispers of the plains, the cry of a nightjar, the far-off bellow of buffalo, the rustle of unseen movement. Each sound folded into the next, creating a tapestry of life that pulsed beneath the stars. The first moonlight crept over the land, silvering every blade of grass. It kissed the lion's fur, making them glow faintly, as though the earth itself guarded them. Sephi opened one eye. He heard it, a low, uneven laugh carried by the wind. His ear flicked, muscles tightening, but he did not rise. The hyena's mirth was distant still, a ghost of sound, a reminder that danger never truly vanished here. His gaze shifted toward the carcass in the distance, now surrounded by flickering shapes. The hyenas had begun their feast. He watched them briefly, their cackles muted, their jaws tearing quietly. There was no anger in his stare, only weary acknowledgement. The savanna fed all in time. The lionesses stirred slightly, but did not move to challenge. They knew their strength lay not in endless battle, but in wisdom, the understanding that night had its own rulers. The pride's unity, forged through struggle, allowed rest without fear. One of the younger females rose, padded silently to the edge of the grove, and drank from a shallow pool where the moon trembled on the surface. Ripples spread like quiet thoughts across the water. Overhead, constellations gathered. Ancient hunters, serpents, and lions drawn in starlight across the heavens. Sephi lifted his head, gazing at them with slow recognition. In their patterns, he sensed the endless repetition of what had just passed. Battle, death, renewal. Somewhere above, perhaps, the spirit of the serpent moved now, joining the cosmic cycle that never ceased. The night deepened. The hyenas' laughter faded, replaced by the rhythmic rasp of their feeding. The wind changed direction, bringing the faint scent of rain from far away. Thunder rolled softly beyond the hills, a promise of tomorrow's cleansing storm. Sephi lowered his head again, his great form merging with the dark. The pride slept. The cubs dreamed, perhaps of coils and roars, of survival and strength. The savanna held them all, predator and scavenger alike, beneath its vast, breathing silence. And somewhere beyond the trees, the first lightning flashed, a thin, white scar across the blackness, as though the gods themselves were signing their approval upon the night. By dawn, the savanna had transformed. The sky, once calm and copper-hued, now churned with gray clouds that swallowed the horizon. The wind came first, a slow, low sigh that bent the grass and sent dust spiraling across the plain. Then, like a growl from the heavens, thunder rolled. The lion stirred beneath the acacia grove as the first drops fell, fat and heavy, spattering the earth that had waited months for rain. Sephi rose, his mane darkening under the downpour, clumps of mud clinging to his paws. Around him, the pride began to move, lionesses shaking off sleep, cubs blinking in wonder at the sky's fury. The rain was not gentle. It came in sheets, washing over the bones of the python, over the tracks of struggle still etched into the earth. The scent of blood faded, replaced by that of wet soil, rich, raw, alive. Nature's cleansing hand had returned, erasing yesterday's violence and preparing the ground for what would come next. Lightning slashed across the horizon, a crooked vein of light illuminating the lions like ghosts in motion. They stood against the storm, proud, unbroken, elemental. Sefu's roar rose above the wind, deep and resonant, a sound not a challenge but dominion. It was a declaration to the sky itself. We are still here. The cubs flinched, then pressed closer to their mothers. The lionesses watched him with quiet reverence, their eyes catching flashes of silver as rain traced their fur. Far across the plain, the hyenas scattered for cover. The vultures, soaked and grounded, huddled beneath thorn bushes, wings drooping. Even the insects seemed to vanish into the soil. Only the lions remained visible, walking slowly through the storm as though guided by an unseen purpose. Their golden coats turned bronze, their outlines blurred by sheets of water. The savannah trembled underfoot, a living thing revived by thunder. The python's carcass lay half-submerged now, twisted and motionless. Yet even in death it served life. Water pooled around its body, forming small rivulets that slithered outward, carrying nourishment to the thirsty grass. Seeds that had lain dormant beneath the cracked soil began to stir, splitting open to release tender green shoots. The cycle was already turning. Predator, prey, and earth bound together in eternal rhythm of survival. Sefu halted at the crest of a small rise, looking down at his territory. The rain veiled the world in a ghostly shimmer. The lionesses joined him, their bodies forming a single golden arc. For a long moment they stood there, the pride of kings, the rulers of a realm reborn. Around them, the thunder softened, replaced by the softer music of falling rain. The storm was no longer a threat. It was a benediction. In that silence, broken only by raindrops and distant thunder, a different energy took hold. Calm, reflective, almost sacred. The lions began to move again, heading toward the lowlands where acacia roots held water. Their paws sank into mud, leaving trails that glistened like fresh ink on parchment. Each print marked both their passage and their survival, an unspoken language the earth itself could read. Hours passed before the storm began to ease. The clouds tore open to reveal a pale, clean light. Steam rose from the ground in soft waves, wrapping the lions in a haze of warmth. Birds returned first. Small, quick flashes of color darting between wet branches. Then the insects, humming in the air. Life, relentless and unyielding, surged back into the land. The cubs played in puddles, batting at reflections of their own faces. One chased a butterfly and slipped, splashing water into the air like laughter. The lionesses watched with patient eyes, their tails flicking idly. Sefu remained still, surveying the wide plain that stretched endlessly before him. The scars of the battle were gone, yet the memory lingered, a quiet truth written in instinct and blood. He turned his gaze to the horizon, where sunlight began to pierce the clouds, painting the grass with streaks of gold. The world shimmered, fresh, forgiving, alive again. The python's remains were now little more than a shadow beneath the water, soon to vanish completely. Such was the law of the savannah. What perishes gives way to what endures. The pride moved as one toward the distant trees, their silhouettes framed by light. Every motion, every breath carried the weight of their survival and the grace of nature's renewal. For a brief, perfect moment, the world seemed balanced, predator and prey, life and death, storm and calm. And as the sun broke fully through, a rainbow arced across the sky, faint, fleeting, but magnificent. Its colors fell upon Sefu's mane like a crown, and the lions walked on beneath it, rulers not by force, but by the quiet acceptance of the wild's eternal truth, that all strength must bow, someday, to the rhythm of life itself. When the first rays of sunlight finally broke through the departing clouds, the savannah glistened like gold leaf under a painter's brush. The storm had passed, leaving the land reborn, every blade of grass bejeweled with droplets, every leaf whispering with new breath. The air was dense with the scent of wet earth and promise. It was as if the entire wilderness had exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. For the pride of lions, this was not merely a morning, it was a resurrection. Sephi stood atop a termite mound, his mane now dry and wild than before, glinting bronze in the sunlight. The world before him was transformed. Where once had been cracked dust and silence, now life pulsed again. Streams that had been dry trenches for months now shimmered, winding through the lowlands like veins of silver. Birds soared above them, egrets, storks, and the occasional falcon riding invisible currents of wind. The land was alive, and so was its king. Around him, the pride had spread out, moving with lazy elegance through the emerald grass that brushed their bellies. The cubs tumbled and pounced, rolling in the mud, their coats spattered but their spirits soaring. The lionesses watched with indulgent eyes, powerful, patient, yet ever alert. Even in this time of peace, their ears flicked constantly, catching every rustle, every distant cry that might spell danger or opportunity. The savannah's calm was deceptive. Beneath it, life still played by the same ruthless rules. At the edge of the newly formed watering hole, the python's remains had almost disappeared. What had once been a symbol of menace now served as a silent monument to nature's transformation. Small fish darted between its bones, and frogs perched upon its scales, croaking rhythmically as if chanting a hymn to life itself. Butterflies hovered above the scene, flashes of blue, orange, and white dancing through beams of sun. Nothing in the wild was wasted. Everything was reclaimed. Farther out, a herd of wildebeest appeared, dark bodies moving like a living tide. The storm had drawn them back from their migration, guided by the scent of new grass. Zebras followed close behind, their stripes gleaming wet under the light. The air vibrated with movement and the faint drum of hooves. The lions lifted their heads, eyes narrowing. Hunger had returned with the calm, a reminder that renewal came at a cost. Sephi descended the mound slowly, each step deliberate. The lionesses fanned out beside him, instinct pulling them into formation. Yet this was not a hunt born of desperation. It was one of rhythm, of nature resuming its pulse. The cubs were herded to safety near the grove, their playful growls replaced with watchful silence. Sephi led the pride to the fringe of the plain where the wind shifted, carrying the musk of prey. The world seemed to hold its breath once more. In the tall grass, the lionesses crouched, muscles rippling, eyes unblinking, tails twitching in perfect synchronization. They were poetry in motion, every fiber there being tuned to the thrill of the chase. Sephi remained behind them, the watcher and the judge, his deep gaze tracking every movement. A zebra strayed from the herd, distracted by the sweetness of new shoots. That was all it took. The first lioness surged forward, a blur of gold and sinew. Then another and another. The grass erupted, and the air filled with the thunder of pursuit. The zebra bolted, legs flashing, panic turning its flight into chaos. Dust rose in columns. Birds exploded into the air, and the very earth seemed to tremble beneath the fury of life and death colliding once again. The hunt was swift, precise, the artistry of survival rendered in motion. When it ended, silence returned just as suddenly as it had vanished. The lionesses stood over their kill, chests heaving, eyes glinting with satisfaction and reverence. Sephi approached, dignified and calm, his authority unquestioned. The pride gathered, and the feast began, not in cruelty but in gratitude. They ate under the watchful gaze of vultures, circling above, their shadows drifting lazily across the wet earth. As they fed, the cubs watched from a distance, learning through instinct the lessons their ancestors had written in blood and bone. This was not savagery, it was balance. The savannah was not cruel, it was just honest. Every creature played its part, every moment carried meaning. Even the python, whose ghost still lingered near the water's edge, had been part of this eternal design. When the lions were done, they retreated to the shade of the acacia trees, leaving the remnants for scavengers who waited patiently, hyenas with laughing faces, jackals with sharp eyes. Soon, the sky filled again with the sound of life reclaiming what was left. Nothing went to waste. Everything had purpose. The afternoon sun sank slowly, washing plains in hues of amber and rose. Steam rose from the ground, carrying the scent of blood, grass, and rain into the cooling air. The cubs, full and drowsy, curled beside their mothers. The lionesses cleaned them gently, tongues rasping over soft fur. Sephi lay apart, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert to every sound. The day's rhythm slowed. Crickets began to sing from the damp grass. Frogs croaked in chorus from the new ponds. The world felt full, pulsing with vitality and purpose. For the lions, for the prey, for the scavengers, it was all the same, an endless circle, turning without mercy or malice. Sephi lifted his head to watch the sky, now painted in streaks of violet and orange. The first stars began to appear, trembling in the dim light. He exhaled deeply, his breath merging with the wind. Around him, the savannah pulsed quietly, alive in every shadow, every echo. Tomorrow would bring another hunt, another storm, another dawn. But for now, there was peace, not the peace of stillness, but the peace of harmony. The pride slept soundly as night descended, their bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of the earth. And beneath the starlit sky, the wild continued to whisper its eternal truth, that life, no matter how fierce, always finds a way to return. Night descended upon the savannah like a velvet curtain, heavy and absolute. The sky stretched wide and star-filled, an endless ocean of glittering ice above the dark earth. The air had cooled, thick with the scent of rain-soaked grass and distant life. For most creatures, the night was a time of rest. But for others, for hunters, wanderers, and the restless, it was a time of awakening. The balance of the world was about to shift once again. Sephi stirred beneath the acacia's wide canopy, his amber eyes flickering open. He could feel the pulse of the land. Faint tremors beneath his paws, the heartbeat of the wilderness. Around him, the pride lay in a loose circle, bellies full, bodies steaming gently in the cool air. The cubs nestled close to their mothers, soft whimpers rising now and then as they dreamed to play or prey. Above them, the moon rose, a pale silver coin, its light spilling over the wet grass like liquid glass. The night was alive with whispers. Insects hummed unseen. Frogs croaked from shallow pools. The distant calls of hyenas echoed like laughter carried by ghosts. Every sound told a story, and every silence carried weight. Far out on the plains, something moved, something deliberate, sinuous, and unseen. The shadows shifted as though the darkness itself were crawling across the earth. The lionesses sensed it first. One lifted her head, ears twitching. Another followed, her muscles tightening under her golden fur. A faint hiss carried on the wind, low, sibilant, ancient. Sephi rose slowly, every motion deliberate. His mane shimmered faintly in the moonlight, strands catching silver glints. The pride was alert now, eyes scanning the tall grass that swayed like an ocean under a phantom tide. From the darkness, a shape emerged, massive, sleek, and gliding silently through the grass. For a heartbeat, it looked as if the earth itself had come to life. The python had returned, or perhaps another of its kind, larger, older, drawn by the scent of death and water. Its body moved like liquid muscle, glistening under the moonlight, scales reflecting tiny shards of silver. Each movement was patient, soundless, inevitable. The lionesses formed a defensive circle. Cubs pressed into the center. Their tails flicked, their low growls rumbling like distant thunder. Sephi stepped forward, his breath visible in the cool air. The great snake halted, tongue flickering. Its eyes were black mirrors, ancient and emotionless. The storm had cleansed the land, but not its dangers. The savannah offered no true peace. It only exchanged one predator for another. For long minutes, the two apex hunters faced each other in absolute stillness. Time seemed to hang suspended. The moon carved them both from silver and shadow. The serpent, a relic of the underworld, and the lion, a symbol of dominion and sun. The air itself felt heavy, expectant. Then the stillness broke. The python lunged, a blur of motion, coils slicing through the grass. Sephi leapt aside with impossible speed, claws raking the serpent's flank. The lionesses roared, charging in unison, a golden tempest of muscle and fury. The night erupted into chaos, snarls, hisses, the thud of bodies colliding, the violent music of survival. Dust and moonlight mingled in the air, transforming the scene into a living myth. The snake's power was monstrous. It swung its body with the force of a whip, striking one lioness and sending her tumbling through the grass. Another tried to bite down near its head, but the serpent twisted, fangs flashing as it struck. Its hiss sliced the night like a blade. Sephew roared, a sound that shook the still air and seemed to drive fear into the heart of the darkness itself. He lunged again, this time meeting the serpent head-on. Their clash was raw, primal, eternal, a contest written into the bones of nature itself. The serpent wrapped around him, muscles constricting with the strength of a vice. Sephew's ribs creaked, his breath caught, but he fought on, teeth sinking into the scale flesh. The air filled with the scent of blood and sweat, the ground trembling beneath their struggle. Around them, the lionesses attacked relentlessly, tearing and clawing, their eyes burning with wild determination. The moon climbed higher, cold and unblinking. The world seemed to vanish beyond the circle of violence. No stars, no sound but the fight. Finally, with one final surge, Sephew pushed upward, roaring with the force of storm. His claws raked deep into the serpent's skull, shattering its strike. The python convulsed, its coils loosening just enough for the lion to wrench free. In that moment, one of the lionesses lunged, biting through the serpent's neck. A shudder passed through the earth. Then silence. The serpent fell still, its body coiled in broken loops. The lionesses stood panting, sides heaving, eyes glimmering in the moonlight. Sephew collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged but steady. Around him, the pride gathered, forming a protective circle once again. The cubs, wide-eyed, crept forward, peering at the fallen serpent. The monstrous stories, slain beneath the silver sky. Sephew lifted his head, mane dark and matted, his face streaked with blood and dust. His eyes found the horizon, where faint clouds drifted past the moon. He breathed deeply, the cool air filling his lungs. Around him, the world was silent again, save for the whisper of wind through wet grass. This victory was not like the first. It was quieter, heavier. The lions had faced the wild once more, and won not with rage but with unity. They were not kings of Savannah because they were the strongest, but because they understood the law better than any creature that walked or slithered. The wild gives and the wild takes, and the only thing that endures is courage. As the moon began to sink, Sephew rose once more, his silhouette majestic against the silvered plains. The pride followed him without a sound. Behind them, the serpent's body lay half hidden in the grass, already claimed by insects and shadow. Life would soon return to it, as nourishment, as soil, as memory. The lions moved on, their paws silent against the soft earth. In the darkness, the savannah seemed to breathe again, its pulse slow and eternal. Overhead, stars burned like eyes of forgotten gods, watching their children play out the endless tale of survival below. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of light or time, the spirits of lion and serpent met once more, bound not by hatred, but by the eternal rhythm of life that neither could escape. When dawn returned to Savannah, it came softly, not with thunder or wind, but with the slow, golden unfurling of light across the horizon. The stars dimmed one by one, fading into a sky washed pale with the first hues of morning. The world that had been cloaked in violence and shadow now stretched wide and quiet beneath the newborn sun. Steam rose from the damp earth in ghostly veils, and every blade of grass seemed to glisten as though painted by divine hands. The lions stirred among the tall grass, their bodies draped in dew and exhaustion. The storm, the battles, the blood, all had passed, leaving behind only the breath of survival. Sephew lay atop a small rise, the sunlight warming his battered body. His mane, tangled and darkened with dust, shimmered faintly in gold. Each scar along his flank caught the light, like writing carved by nature's own hand. He blinked slowly, watching the savannah wake. The herds were returning again, wildebeest, gazelles, zebras, their silhouettes black against the amber glow. Even the scavengers crept closer, cautious and silent, drawn by the scent of what the night had left behind. The python's body, now still and half sunk in the mud near the watering hole, gleamed faintly under the rising sun. Insects swarmed over it, and a small flock of egrets picked delicately at the ground nearby. Already, The wilderness had begun its slow act of reclamation. Death, here, was not an ending. It was a beginning wearing another mask. Life fed upon life. Strength gave way to renewal. The serpent that had once been the terror of the dark now nourished the land it had sought to rule. Sephi rose with effort, muscles flexing beneath his golden hide. He looked toward the horizon where the sun spilled over the hills, an endless, burning promise. The lionesses joined him, their cubs trotting clumsily by their sides. They had survived storm's hunger and the night's merciless trial. Now, as the light grew stronger, their golden coats seemed to catch fire, blazing in hues of orange and bronze. They moved together, the pride of kings and queens, walking toward a future that the dawn had promised them. The air was filled with life. The calls of birds echoed through the acacia trees. Frogs croaked in puddles left by the rain. The land itself seemed to hum with energy. Every creature, every leaf, every gust of wind alive in the rhythm of morning. The lions moved through it like living symbols, embodiments of both power and grace. The cubs bounded ahead, pouncing at grasshoppers, their laughter like growls breaking the silence of dawn. Behind them, the lioness's eyes softened with quiet pride. Far across the plain, the sky rippled with heat. Dust rose in thin spirals, glowing in the light. The cycle of Savannah had turned once more, the endless dance of predator and prey, storm and calm, death and life. Sephi knew this truth in his bones. He did not fight it. He did not question it. He belonged to it. Every scar, every roar, every drop of blood spilled was part of the vast design that stretched beyond understanding. He paused at the edge of a shallow stream that had formed from the storm's flood. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. The lion bent his head to drink, and for a moment his reflection shimmered beside the skies. The image was both majestic and fragile. The king of beasts, a creature myth, humbled before the simple act of survival. He drank deeply, feeling the water flow through him like new life. When he lifted his head again, the pride had gathered around him. The cubs nuzzled their mothers. The lionesses groomed one another, tongues rasping gently through fur still matted with battle's dust. It was a ritual older than memory, the silent renewal of unity. Above them, the sun continued to rise, fierce and pure. Shadows fled into the trees, and the savannah began to shimmer with heat and sound. By midday, the world was awake. Herds moved across the plains in steady rhythm. Birds circled above, their cries mingling with the steady rustle of the wind. The lions rested in the tall grass, eyes half closed but always watchful. Peace was not a luxury here. It was a momentary breath between storms. And yet, for now, it was enough. Sephi's gaze drifted toward the distant horizon, where the light trembled and blurred. He thought of the battles fought, not just with fangs and claws, but with hunger, drought, and time itself. He thought of the serpent that had tested their strength and the storm that had cleansed their home. Each trial had stripped them bare and forged them anew. This was the way of the wild. Not mercy, but meaning. As the afternoon waned, a soft breeze stirred the grass, whispering to the pride like a song. The cubs slept curled in sunlight, their tiny sides rising and falling in rhythm with the earth's pulse. The lionesses dozed nearby, heads resting on their paws. Sephi stood once more, stretching his long limbs, and looked upon his kingdom, the vast sea of grass, the glimmer of water, the silhouettes of life moving endlessly across the land. He was not just its ruler. He was its guardian, its witness, its memory. When the sun began to sink again, the world turned golden once more. Shadows stretched long and deep, painting the plains in amber and black. The pride stirred, preparing for another night, another cycle in the endless rhythm. But there was no fear now, no lingering scent of battle, only the quiet certainty that whatever came, they would endure. As the last light faded, Sephi roared, a sound deep and resonant, rising like thunder into the twilight sky. It rolled across the savannah, echoing through valleys, scattering flocks of birds into flight. It was not a challenge, nor a cry of victory. It was a declaration, a hymn to existence itself, a reminder that life, however fleeting, burned bright and fierce in those who dared to live it fully. The sound faded into the distance, blending with the wind, the rustle of grass, and the pulse of the world. The stars returned once more, glittering over the vast plain. The lions settled into the night's embrace, their golden bodies glowing faintly under the moon's light. The savannah breathed again, whole and eternal. And somewhere beyond the horizon, unseen and unheard, the rhythm began anew, the silent, sacred song of balance, where predator and prey, darkness and dawn, life and death all danced together beneath the endless African sky.